The helicopter blades cut through the Afghan dawn like whispered prayers, their rhythm drowning out everything except the truth that was about to surface. Lieutenant Commander Marcus Granite Rodriguez pressed his headset closer to his ear, straining to catch the transmission crackling through static from Bagram Air Base. The words that came through would change everything they thought they knew about the woman sitting 3 feet away, methodically checking IV bags with the steady hands of someone who had saved lives in places where death came calling every hour. Evelyn Ghost Thorne looked like any other civilian contractor nurse deployed to Forward Operating Base Chapman. 34 years old, auburn hair pulled back in a regulation bun, green eyes that seemed to catalog everything while revealing nothing. She wore standard-issue scrubs under her body armor, carried a med kit that had seen more combat zones than most soldiers, and spoke in the measured tones of someone who had learned that silence often served better than words. The SEAL team had initially dismissed her as another do-gooder civilian, the type who signed contracts for double combat pay and thought they understood war from documentary films. But Ghost had been watching them too, noting how Rodriguez favored his left shoulder when he thought no one was looking, how Petty Officer Johnson's hands trembled slightly when he cleaned his rifle, the barely perceptible signs of warriors carrying invisible wounds. She had seen those same tells in a mirror for 7 years, ever since she had traded her flight suit for scrubs, her call sign for anonymity, her wings for a stethoscope. The transmission from Bagram crackled again. "Granite, be advised you have a VIP in your AO, Coulson Ghost. Former Navy, flew A-10s out of Kandahar 2008 to 2015. Distinguished Flying Cross, 2 Purple Hearts, credited with 47 danger close missions. Mission designation, Angel of Death Valley. She saved your ass more times than you know over." Rodriguez's eyes snapped to the woman adjusting morphine drips with surgical precision. The same hands that had once gripped the controls of a $30 million ground attack aircraft, that had delivered salvation from above to Marines pinned down in valleys where hope came with wings and a 30mm GAU-8 cannon. Ghost caught his stare and raised an eyebrow, her expression unchanged, as if she had been waiting 7 years for this moment of recognition. The helicopter banked left toward the landing zone, carrying them all toward a reckoning with a past that refused to stay buried, and a mission that would prove some legends were more than stories whispered around base camps in the dark. The morning sun painted the Hindu Kush mountains in shades of copper and gold, but Ghost's attention remained fixed on her patience, her face betraying nothing of the storm building in the radio chatter around her. She had spent years perfecting the art of invisibility, of being overlooked and underestimated. Today, that carefully constructed facade was about to crumble like morning frost under an Afghan sun. Rodriguez keyed his radio with hands that suddenly felt unsteady. "Bagram, Granite Actual. Can you confirm identity on civilian contractor designation Echo Tango 779er? He needed to hear it again, needed the words to reshape his understanding of the woman who had been treating his wounded for 3 months without ever mentioning that she had once been their guardian angel, circling overhead in an aircraft built for one purpose: keeping ground forces alive at any cost. The response came immediately, as if the operator had been waiting for this question. "Granite, affirmative. Contractor Echo Tango 779er is former Captain Evelyn Thorne, Coulson Ghost. Aircraft designation A-10C Thunderbolt, tail number 800194. Last combat mission, Helmand Province, September 15, 2015. Aircraft took critical damage during danger close CAS mission. Successful emergency landing at Fob Shank. Pilot awarded Distinguished Flying Cross for actions resulting in 0 friendly casualties despite aircraft loss. Transferred to Medical Corps following incident. How copy, over." Ghost's hands never stopped moving as she monitored vitals, adjusted bandages, prepared medications with the methodical efficiency that had kept Marines alive in the back of countless medevac birds. But Rodriguez noticed something he had missed before: the way her eyes automatically tracked the horizon through the helicopter's windows, constantly scanning for threats, measuring distances, calculating angles of attack. Pilot's eyes in a nurse's uniform. Staff Sergeant Maria Vasquez, the team's medic, glanced between Rodriguez and Ghost with growing awareness. She had worked alongside Ghost for 93 days, had watched her save lives with techniques that seemed to blend battlefield medicine with something more intuitive, more aggressive than traditional nursing. Now the pieces were falling into place like coordinates on a targeting system. "Ma'am," Rodriguez said finally, his voice carrying the weight of revelation and respect, "we need to talk." Ghost looked up from the IV line she was adjusting, her green eyes meeting his for the first time since they had lifted off from Chapman. There was no surprise in her gaze, no embarrassment or defensiveness, just the quiet acknowledgement of someone whose cover had been blown by forces beyond her control. "I figured this day would come eventually," she said, her voice steady as mountain granite. "Radio chatter has a way of traveling, even when you think it's buried deep enough to stay dead." The helicopter's engines changed pitch as they approached the landing zone, but the real mission was just beginning. Ghost had spent 7 years hiding from her past, serving quietly in a role that let her save lives without the weight of command, without the responsibility of dropping ordnance, without the nightmares that came with being both savior and destroyer. But war has a way of calling its children home, and some call signs echo longer than others. The LZ appeared below them, a patch of cleared ground surrounded by the kind of terrain that had made Afghanistan the graveyard of empires. Ghost began securing her medical equipment with movements so automatic they seemed choreographed, but Rodriguez caught something else in her posture, the subtle shift from defensive crouch to combat ready, the unconscious adjustment of someone preparing for battle rather than patient care. The dust cloud kicked up by their rotors obscured the landing zone in a familiar brown haze that tasted of history and cordite. Ghost's transformation was subtle but unmistakable. The civilian contractor was disappearing, replaced by something harder, more dangerous. Captain Evelyn Ghost Thorne was coming back to life, whether she wanted to or not. As the wheels touched down on Afghan soil, Rodriguez made a decision that would either save his team or get them all killed. He was going to ask Ghost to be what she used to be, just one more time. Because the mission they were about to undertake required more than a nurse who could keep people alive under fire. It needed a pilot who had earned her wings in the valley of death itself, someone who understood that sometimes salvation came from above, delivered by wings and guns, and the unflinching will to fly into hell itself. Rodriguez felt the familiar weight of command settling on his shoulders as his boots hit the ground. The intelligence briefing had been sparse, classified at levels that required clearances he barely possessed, but the essentials were clear enough. A downed reconnaissance drone in territory controlled by forces that wanted American technology more than they wanted American prisoners. Standard recovery protocol called for air support, close air support, the kind of precision flying that required intimate knowledge of ground tactics and the willingness to put aircraft and pilot at risk for soldiers who might already be dead. Ghost moved through her post-flight routine with practiced efficiency, but Rodriguez noticed her eyes weren't on her medical supplies anymore. She was reading the terrain the way pilots read the sky, measuring elevation changes, identifying potential landing zones, cataloging threats and opportunities with the systematic thoroughness of someone trained to think in 3 dimensions while moving at 400 knots. The mission briefing took place in a dust-covered Connex container that served as the forward operations center, its metal walls lined with maps, radio equipment, and the accumulated detritus of a war that had been grinding forward for longer than some of the soldiers had been alive. Major Patricia Hawk Kellerman, the officer in charge of the recovery operation, stood before a tactical display showing the crash site, a valley 40 kilometers northeast, surrounded by ridgelines that made it a natural fortress for anyone wanting to defend it. "Gentlemen," Kellerman began, then caught sight of Ghost and adjusted, And lady, we have a problem. The MQ-9 went down in Sector 77 Charlie at approximately 3:47 hours. Preliminary assessment indicates mechanical failure, not enemy action, but the crash site is now in disputed territory. Local intelligence suggests Taliban forces are moving toward the wreckage, ETA unknown but assume immediate. Ghost studied the map with the intensity of someone who had navigated these same mountains from 30,000 feet, who had memorized every ridge and valley where American forces had bled and died. The crash site sat in a bowl-shaped depression accessible by only two routes: a narrow canyon approach from the east, and a more direct but exposed path from the south that would leave any ground force completely vulnerable to observation and fire from the surrounding heights. "What's the payload?" Rodriguez asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Classified," Kellerman replied, "but let's just say it contains technology that cannot fall into hostile hands. Recovery is priority 1. Denial is priority 2. Questions?" Ghost raised her hand, the movement so natural that everyone turned to her before remembering she was supposed to be medical personnel, not mission planning staff. "Ma'am, what's the air support package?" Kellerman consulted her tablet, scrolling through digital pages that glowed blue in the container's artificial light. "Two F-16s on station at altitude, call sign Viper flight. Apache gunship support if available, but they're committed to operations in Helmand." "Why?" Ghost looked at the map again, her finger tracing the approach routes with the precision of someone who had flown similar missions, who understood the geometry of death from above. Those ridgelines are going to channel any fixed-wing aircraft into predictable flight paths. Lots of places to hide MANPADs. Lots of opportunities for ground fire to converge on approach corridors. The F-16s are going to be limited in what they can do without putting themselves at unacceptable risk. The room fell silent. Kellerman looked at Ghost with new attention, the kind of reassessment that happens when someone reveals expertise where none was expected. Rodriguez felt a familiar tightness in his chest, the sensation of pieces falling into place in ways that suggested both opportunity and danger. "And your recommendation, Contractor Thorne?" Ghost's answer came without hesitation, as if she had been planning this moment for 7 years. "You need low and slow close air support, someone who can work the nooks and crannies, who can put ordnance exactly where ground forces need it without leveling the surrounding mountainside. You need an A-10. The silence stretched longer this time, heavy with implications that everyone in the room understood but no one wanted to voice. There was one A-10 squadron still operating in theater, based out of Kandahar, but their mission tempo was maxed out supporting operations across 3 provinces. Getting dedicated CAS for a single recovery mission would require pulling assets from other operations, leaving other American forces without air cover, making choices that could cost lives in places they would never know about. Rodriguez made the call that would define the next 72 hours of their lives. "Major, I need to speak with you privately about Contractor Thorne's qualifications to assess this tactical situation." The conversation that followed lasted 17 minutes and changed everything. When Rodriguez emerged from the private briefing, he wore the expression of a man who had just been offered a gift that might be too good to be true, or too dangerous to refuse. Ghost was waiting outside, her medical bag slung over her shoulder, green eyes holding the kind of patience that suggested she had been preparing for this conversation for longer than anyone realized. "Captain," Rodriguez said, testing the rank like a key in a lock that might not turn, "we need to talk about your current role in this operation." Ghost's smile was the first genuine expression he had seen from her in 3 months, transforming her face from professionally neutral to something that reminded him why pilots had earned reputations as predators with wings. "Commander, my current role is whatever keeps the most Americans alive and brings them home intact. If that means going back to doing what I used to do, then that's what I'm prepared for." The decision was made in that moment. though it would take another hour of radio calls to higher command, encrypted communications with personnel files that most people didn't have clearance to access, and the kind of bureaucratic maneuvering that could either authorize a miracle or end careers in spectacular fashion. But Rodriguez had learned to trust his instincts in places where hesitation cost lives, and every instinct he possessed was telling him that Ghost was the key to bringing his people home. By 1400 hours, the impossible had become official. Contractor Evelyn Thorne was being temporarily reactivated to active duty status, with full flight privileges and tactical command authority for close air support operations. The paperwork existed, the authorizations were genuine, and somewhere in the labyrinthine depths of military bureaucracy, a personnel file that had been gathering dust for 7 years was suddenly updated with a new assignment. Ghost stood in the makeshift armory, running her hands over flight gear she had not worn since the day her A-10 had limped back to base on one engine, and a prayer, leaving pieces of itself, scattered across Helmand Province like metal tears. The flight suit felt strange after years of scrubs, the harness points unfamiliar to hands that had grown accustomed to stethoscopes and IV lines instead of control sticks and weapon selectors. Rodriguez watched her transform with something approaching reverence. This was more than putting on old clothes. It was watching someone reclaim an identity they had buried so deep that even they had almost forgotten who they used to be. Ghost was becoming Captain Thorne again, but the years as a civilian contractor had changed her in ways that might make her either better or worse at the job she had once done with lethal precision. The A-10C Thunderbolt II that sat on the tarmac at Kandahar was not the same aircraft Ghost had flown 7 years earlier, but the differences were superficial. Updated avionics, improved defensive systems, digital displays where analog gauges used to be. The fundamentals remained unchanged. 30mm cannon built around an airplane titanium bathtub to protect the pilot, and the kind of low-altitude agility that made it the most feared ground attack aircraft in the American arsenal. Ghost completed her walk-around inspection with movements that started rusty and became more fluid with each check. Hydraulic fluid levels, control surface integrity, ammunition load, 1,174 rounds of 30mm depleted uranium, enough to turn any ground target into component molecules. The external stores were configured for close support. 2 AGM-65 Maverick missiles, 4 500-pound bombs, and a full load of 2.75-inch rockets. Enough firepower to level a small town, or to precisely eliminate threats without harming friendlies separated by distances measured in meters rather than kilometers. The pre-flight briefing was conducted via encrypted satellite link, connecting Ghost with intelligence assets, weather services, and the forward air controller who would be her eyes on the ground. Staff Sergeant Jennifer, Voodoo Park had been calling in airstrikes for 4 deployments, had earned her reputation by keeping close air support missions surgical when the difference between precision and area effect was measured in American lives. Ghost Voodoo, good to have you back in the air. Been following your civilian work. Heard you've been keeping Marines alive from the ground instead of the sky. Ghost adjusted her helmet, the familiar weight settling into place like muscle memory awakening from a long sleep. Voodoo, Ghost. Different tools, same mission. Let's talk about what we're flying into. The tactical situation had evolved during the hours of paperwork and preparation. Taliban forces had reached the crash site and established a defensive perimeter, but they had not yet successfully extracted the sensitive equipment from the wreckage. Reconnaissance drones operating at maximum altitude had identified at least 40 hostiles, heavy machine gun positions on 3 of the 4 ridgelines surrounding the valley, and what appeared to be a mobile anti-aircraft system, probably a Russian-made SA-7, shoulder-fired and deadly to low-flying aircraft. Ghost absorbed the intelligence updates while running through startup procedures that her hands remembered even if her conscious mind had forgotten some of the details. The twin General Electric TF-34 engine spooled up with a sound like controlled thunder, and suddenly she was not a contractor anymore, not a nurse, not someone hiding from her past. She was a pilot again, strapped into a machine designed for one purpose: bringing American soldiers home alive. The takeoff roll felt like resurrection. Ghost had forgotten the sensation of controlled violence that came with military aviation, the way an A-10 gathered speed not with the graceful acceleration of civilian aircraft, but with the determined inevitability of something built to absorb punishment and deliver it in return. The landing gear retracted with solid metallic finality, and Afghanistan spread out below her like a tactical map made real, brown and tan, and unforgiving, marked with the scars of conflicts stretching back thousands of years. Rodriguez and his team were already moving toward the crash site in armored vehicles that looked like toys from 30,000 feet. Ghost established radio contact with the convoy, her voice carrying the kind of calm authority that made ground forces feel safer just knowing she was overhead. "Granite, Ghost, I have you visual, 2 clicks south of Waypoint Charlie. How copy?" "Ghost, Granite, copy solid. Good to have you back where you belong." The words hit harder than expected. Where you belong. Ghost had spent 7 years wondering if she belonged anywhere, if the transition from warrior to healer was complete, or just another form of camouflage. Now, cruising at 25,000 feet above terrain she had memorized from previous wars, she felt something she had not experienced since the day her crippled had barely made it back to friendly territory. She felt like she was home. The crash site appeared on her tactical display as a bright green diamond, surrounded by red threat indicators that pulsed with the rhythm of imminent danger. Ghost began her descent, trading altitude for speed and maneuverability, preparing to enter the kind of aerial knife fight that had made her reputation and nearly cost her life. The sky above Afghanistan was about to remember why they called her Ghost, not because she was invisible, but because she appeared without warning and left only silence behind. The first pass over the target area was pure reconnaissance, Ghost flying high enough to stay above the effective range of small arms fire, while gathering intelligence that no satellite or drone could provide. The crashed MQ-9 sat in the center of the valley like a broken bird, its wings scattered across the rocky ground in pieces small enough to suggest the impact had been catastrophic. Taliban forces had established defensive positions with the kind of tactical sophistication that indicated experienced leadership, overlapping fields of fire, covered approaches to the wreckage, and what appeared to be a command post dug into the north-facing slope where it could coordinate the entire defensive effort. Ghost keyed her radio to the ground frequency, her voice calm despite the growing complexity of the tactical situation. "Voodoo, Ghost. I count 40 plus hostiles in defensive positions around the crash site. They're organized, well-positioned, and they've got at least 2 crew-served weapons that I can identify. This isn't going to be quick and clean." Voodoo's response crackled through her headset with the matter-of-fact tone of someone who had learned to deliver bad news without emotion. "Ghost, Voodoo. Granite's convoy is 20 mics out, but we've got additional problems. Drone surveillance shows more hostiles moving toward your AO from the north. Looks like reinforcements, maybe 60 to 80 personnel. Timeline just got compressed." Ghost checked her fuel status and weapons load while absorbing the tactical update. She had enough flight time for sustained operations, but the longer this mission dragged on, the more dangerous it became for everyone involved. The A-10 was built for close air support, but it was not invulnerable. Enough concentrated ground fire could bring down even the most heavily armored aircraft, and Ghost had learned that lesson the hard way 7 years earlier. She began her attack run from the east, using the rising sun to mask her approach while staying low enough to avoid radar detection, but high enough to have maneuvering room when the shooting started. The 30mm cannon was her weapon of choice for this kind of precision work, surgical strikes that could eliminate individual targets without creating the collateral damage that came with bombs or missiles. The first burst caught a machine gun position on the eastern ridge. 30 rounds of depleted uranium delivered with the precision of a sniper rifle scaled up to aircraft size. The position simply ceased to exist, vaporized in a cloud of dust and metal fragments that settled over the valley like the final punctuation mark on a very short sentence. Ghost rolled inverted and pulled through a knife-edge turn that would have killed a lesser aircraft, lining up on her next target while trying to stay ahead of the ground fire that was already starting to reach for her. Rodriguez watched the attack unfold from his position 3 kilometers away, his binoculars tracking the A-10 as it carved through the sky with lethal grace. This was not the tentative civilian contractor he had known for 3 months. This was a combat pilot operating at the peak of her abilities, making split-second decisions that kept her alive while systematically dismantling enemy positions with surgical precision. Granite Ghost, Eastern Ridge is clear. Moving to engage the command post. Keep your heads down, this is going to get loud. The Maverick missile came off the rail with a sound like controlled lightning, its solid fuel motor accelerating it toward the target at twice the speed of sound. Ghost had selected the largest structure in the enemy defensive network, a reinforced position that looked like it might contain communications equipment, leadership personnel, or both. The explosion lit up the valley floor like a miniature sunrise, sending a mushroom cloud of debris and smoke 500 feet into the morning air. But the Taliban fighters were not breaking. Instead of retreating or surrendering, they were adapting their tactics, repositioning to engage the A-10 with concentrated fire from multiple directions. Ghost saw muzzle flashes from at least 8 positions as she pulled out of her attack dive, and something spanged off her left wing with the metallic ring that meant someone down there was getting lucky with their aim. Ghost Voodoo. Be advised, we're seeing movement from those northern reinforcements. Looks like they're trying to get heavy weapons into position to engage you. Ghost acknowledged the call while rolling into another attack run, this one targeting a cluster of fighters who had made the mistake of bunching up near the wreckage. The A-10's cannon spoke again, a sound like the world's largest zipper being opened and closed in 2 seconds. The ground erupted in fountains of dust and debris, and when it settled, the cluster of hostiles had been reduced to component molecules. She was starting to feel it now, the combat rhythm that had sustained her through 47 previous missions, the state of heightened awareness where time slowed down, and threats became geometric problems to be solved with ordnance and airmanship. This was what she had been born to do, what 7 years of civilian medicine had never quite replaced. Ghost was back in her element, and the sky above Afghanistan was about to remember why her call sign had become legend. The SA-7 missile launch looked like a bright star rising from the valley floor, climbing toward her with the inexorable patience of guided death. Ghost had been expecting it. Shoulder-fired surface-to-air missiles were standard equipment for Taliban forces engaging low-flying aircraft, and she had been flying low enough to make herself an attractive target. The missile's infrared seeker had locked onto her engine heat signature, and it was climbing fast enough to intercept her current flight path in approximately 12 seconds. Ghost's response was automatic muscle memory from hundreds of hours of training and 7 years of combat missions that had prepared her for exactly this moment. She dumped chaff and flares while pulling into a climbing turn that loaded the airframe with enough G-forces to make her vision gray around the edges. But the A-10 was built to absorb punishment and keep flying. The missile lost lock as her heat signature was obscured by countermeasures, detonating harmlessly 500 feet behind her left wingtip in a fireball that painted temporary shadows on the valley walls. Ghost Granite, nice flying. We're moving into position now. Can you give us covering fire on the southern approach? Ghost rolled wings level and checked her ammunition status. The 30 cannon had 800 rounds remaining, enough for sustained fire support, but not enough to waste on targets of opportunity. The mission was entering its most dangerous phase, ground forces moving into direct contact with the enemy, where the margin for error in close air support became measured in feet rather than yards, where a mistake could kill the people she was supposed to be protecting. Rodriguez led his team through the rocky terrain with the methodical precision of professionals who knew that speed was less important than staying alive. The Taliban defensive positions had been significantly reduced by Ghost's air attacks, but enough hostiles remained to make the final approach a run-and-gun battle through terrain that favored defenders who knew every boulder and fighting position. Ghost orbited overhead like a mechanical guardian angel, her aircraft describing lazy figure eights that kept the target area under constant observation while conserving fuel and ammunition. She could see Rodriguez's team advancing through her targeting pod display, individual soldiers rendered in infrared as bright white figures moving against the cooler background of Afghan mountainside. 20 meters to their left, 3 Taliban fighters were setting up what looked like an RPG position behind a cluster of rocks that would give them a perfect shot at the advancing Americans. Granite Ghost, hold position. You've got 3 hostiles with RPG, you're 9 o'clock 20 meters, engaging now. The cannon burst was surgical, 15 rounds that eliminated the RPG team without disturbing the rocks they had been hiding behind. Ghost's targeting was so precise that Rodriguez's team didn't even feel the concussion from the 30 impacts, just heard the brief thunder of the GAU-8 cannon, and saw the threat indicators on their tactical displays go dark. The recovery of the sensitive equipment from the drone wreckage took 47 minutes under Ghost's protective umbrella. She made 3 more strafing runs during that time, each one eliminating Taliban reinforcements who were trying to establish new firing positions or bring heavy weapons to bear on the exposed ground team. Her ammunition status was dropping toward minimum reserves, but the mission was almost complete. Rodriguez had secured the classified payload and was preparing to withdraw with his team intact. But Afghanistan had one more surprise waiting, the kind of tactical curveball that turned routine missions into the stuff of legend or tragedy. The northern reinforcements that intelligence had identified were not just another group of Taliban fighters. They were a specialized anti-aircraft unit equipped with Russian-made equipment that had been crossing the border from Pakistan in increasing numbers. The ZSU-23-4 Shilka that appeared on the ridgeline was a quad-barreled 20-3 anti-aircraft cannon mounted on an armored chassis, designed specifically to engage low-flying aircraft with radar-guided precision. Ghost saw it on her targeting display just as it began tracking her aircraft, 4 gun barrels swiveling to follow her flight path with mechanical precision that made her blood run cold. The Shilka was a relic of the Cold War, but it was a dangerous relic. Those 4 cannons could put 3,400 rounds per minute into the air, creating a cone of destruction that would shred even an armored A-10 if it caught her in the wrong place at the wrong time. The tactical situation had just shifted from routine close air support to aerial combat against a system designed to kill her aircraft. Ghost had 2 choices: withdraw and leave Rodriguez's team without air cover for their extraction, or engage the Shilka in the kind of one-on-one duel that pilots trained for but hoped never to experience. She made her choice in the time it took her heart to beat twice, rolling into an attack dive that would either eliminate the threat or get her killed in the next 30 seconds. The Shilka opened fire just as Ghost committed to her attack run, 4 streams of 23 tracer rounds reaching up toward her like deadly fireworks. Ghost flew straight into the barrage with the kind of controlled aggression that had earned her the Distinguished Flying Cross, her finger steady on the cannon trigger as she lined up the shot that would determine whether she lived or died in the next 5 seconds. The GAU-8 cannon spoke with the voice of controlled thunder, sending a stream of 30 depleted uranium rounds downrange at the enemy anti-aircraft system. Ghost held the trigger for 3 seconds, 90 rounds that carved a line of destruction across the mountainside, walking from the base of the ridgeline to the position where the Shilka was trying to track her aircraft. The enemy system simply disintegrated under the impact of uranium slugs traveling at nearly the speed of sound, transforming from a deadly threat into scattered metal fragments in the space of a heartbeat. But the Shilka had gotten lucky with its final burst. Ghost felt the aircraft shudder as something large and metallic struck her left engine, followed immediately by warning lights and alarm tones that indicated catastrophic damage to her power plant. The engine was winding down, hydraulic pressure was dropping, and she had suddenly become a pilot flying a crippled aircraft over hostile territory with a ground team depending on her for protection. Rodriguez's voice crackled through her headset with the kind of controlled urgency that indicated a professional recognizing when everything was about to go sideways. "Ghost, Granite, we see smoke from your aircraft. What's your status?" Ghost ran through her emergency procedures with the automatic precision of someone who had practiced for this exact scenario, though she had hoped never to experience it twice in one career. The right engine was still functioning, but single-engine operations in an A-10 over mountainous terrain was a delicate proposition that required careful management of altitude, airspeed, and fuel consumption. She had enough power to stay airborne, but not enough to maintain extended combat operations. "Granite, Ghost, I've taken engine damage, but I'm still flying. Fuel and ammunition are both getting critical. We need to wrap this up fast." The extraction went exactly according to plan until the moment when everything fell apart. Rodriguez's team had secured the classified payload and was moving toward the designated pickup zone when intelligence reported additional Taliban forces converging on their position from 3 directions. The helicopter that was supposed to extract them was still 20 minutes out, and 20 minutes was too long to survive in the open against the kind of numbers they were facing. Ghost made the calculation that would define the rest of her life. She could provide covering fire with her remaining ammunition, but doing so would drain her fuel reserves to the point where reaching a friendly airfield became questionable. She could withdraw to preserve her aircraft and crew, but that would leave Rodriguez's team exposed to overwhelming enemy forces. Or she could do what A-10 pilots had been doing for 40 years, stay on station until the job was done, regardless of the personal cost. "Granite, Ghost, I'm staying overhead until you're extracted. Don't argue with me on this one." Rodriguez understood immediately what Ghost was offering to do and what it might cost her. He had been in the military long enough to recognize the difference between professional duty and personal sacrifice, and he knew which one he was witnessing. "Ghost, Granite, we don't expect you to." "Granite, Ghost, this is not a discussion. I've got enough fuel to keep you alive until the cavalry arrives, and that's exactly what I'm going to do. Focus on staying alive down there, I'll handle the sky." The final 20 minutes of the mission became a masterclass in close air support conducted under impossible conditions. Ghost extended her loiter time by throttling back to minimum power settings, gliding whenever possible, and using her remaining ammunition with surgical precision that eliminated threats without wasting a single round. She became the eye in the sky that guided Rodriguez's team through terrain that offered concealment from converging enemy forces, calling out threats and opportunities with the calm professionalism of someone who had accepted that this might be her final mission. The extraction helicopter appeared on the horizon at exactly 16:47 hours, its rotor blades cutting through the afternoon air with the sound of salvation approaching. Ghost provided overwatch as Rodriguez's team was lifted out of the valley, her fuel gauges showing levels that made reaching friendly territory a matter of mathematics rather than certainty. But the ground team was safe, the classified payload was secure, and Ghost had kept her promise to bring them all home alive. The flight back to Kandahar was the longest 37 minutes of Ghost's life. Flying a damaged A-10 on one engine while nursing fuel reserves that might or might not be sufficient to reach friendly airspace required the kind of airmanship that separated good pilots from legends. Ghost flew with the precision of someone who understood that every control input, every power setting adjustment, every navigational decision was the difference between landing safely and becoming another casualty statistic in a war that had already claimed too many aircraft and aircrew. She made it to Kandahar with 4 minutes of fuel remaining and an engine that was running on borrowed time. The landing was controlled but firm, the kind of arrival that gets noticed by everyone on the flight line, because they can hear that this aircraft has been places and done things that aircraft are not supposed to survive. Ground crews surrounded the A-10 as Ghost shut down systems that had functioned far beyond their design parameters, and the damage assessment that followed revealed just how close she had come to not making it home at all. Rodriguez was waiting when Ghost finally climbed out of the cockpit, his face showing the kind of expression that comes with watching someone risk everything for people they barely know. The conversation they had on the flight line lasted only 3 minutes, but it established a bond that would endure long after the mission reports were filed, and the classified details were buried in archives that most people would never access. "Captain," Rodriguez said, using her rank with the kind of respect that acknowledged what she had just accomplished, "I don't know how to thank you for what you did up there." Ghost looked at the damaged A-10, then at the SEAL team commander who had given her the chance to be what she used to be, just one more time. "Commander, you already did. You reminded me who I was before I forgot." The mission debrief took place in a secure facility where Ghost's actions were analyzed, documented, and classified at levels that ensured the full story would remain buried for decades. But the important details traveled through unofficial channels, the kind of stories that get passed along in ready rooms and NCO clubs, and anywhere warriors gather to remember the people who exemplify the best of what military service can be. Within 48 hours, everyone at Kandahar knew that Ghost was back, that the Angel of Death Valley had returned to active duty in a way that reminded people why legends become legends in the first place. But Ghost herself was already thinking about the future, about what came next for someone who had spent 7 years hiding from her past, only to discover that the past was exactly what the present needed. The conversation with Major Kellerman took place 3 days after the mission, in the same Connex container where Ghost had first been asked to assess the tactical situation that led to her return to combat flying. The offer was simple and complicated: permanent return to active duty, immediate promotion to major, assignment to a